So I took this webinar, and the webinar was produced by professional people who talked about how to improve training practices. And what I found interesting was that all the presentation was defining what they were saying the new practice should be and talking about how all the big companies in the US are using this training philosophy and didn't talk about anything else. And that was the end of the webinar. And a lot of us in the chats were like, well, what could you even define what this actually is? I mean, you just said the word description, and then told us that these companies use them and all the different graphs that explained how the companies use them, but didn't tell us what it was or any of the ideas of the learning theory behind what it was. And so I asked that question in the comment thread. I said, hey, would you talk a little bit about what's the root learning theory behind this concept that you're trying to persuade us to? And how do you see that impacting how human beings learn in the long term? Is this a helpful thing that we're trying to help people learn through? Or is this something that might be a challenge to oftentimes the way we learn, and it might be a new challenge for us? Could you explain a little bit on the background to this concept? And it was shocking to hear his answer that basically learning theories and the history behind any new concept that we're coming up with, which they're claiming to be new, that both of those things are irrelevant. That there is no need for us to understand why we are learning something or why we're changing, just only if it works. And I was a history teacher for many years. I'm also a history buff. I just love history. And so that struck me very strange because I've studied, and one of my favorite parts of history are people who have innovated in the past and have done something that no one has ever done prior to them, or have taken the next step in innovation because they challenged the status quo. And so I didn't understand the idea that in order for us to progress, that we really don't even need to understand why we're learning something or why we're doing something, and that we don't even need to root it in any kind of history. And this is a very common thought process. I've heard this many times from professionals all throughout the communities that I'm connected with on LinkedIn and in other communities. And I think that it's a shortfall in our strategy for innovation, whether you are a business leader, mid-level manager, or whether you are a person who runs your own business or is a corporate leader. Thinking that history are nothing but shackles to you will come back to haunt your legacy. Because that right there, history is about defining your legacy, what your legacy will be to history. And those who do not learn from their history will repeat it, as the common phrase is known. And so the question is, when you're developing innovative practices that you're going to try out in your teams or kind of mandate throughout your organization, you should think about one thing. What do you want your legacy to be? And is the steps that you're taking going to leave a legacy that help us progress in history, or help us or start to regress us in history? What is the point of why we are doing what we are doing? Is it helpful to our people and to how human beings learn? Or is it something that may help to bring us in the wrong direction and hold us back from the potential that we have to offer in order to make the world better? Those questions should be a part of how we frame our strategy going forward in any development context. And knowing your history is a lot like doing market research for your future legacy. If you think about it, we do market research whenever we do, a strategic development or an innovation, and we want to make sure that what our competition's doing, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, what they haven't even thought about doing, and to really find that niche that we can fill our market share in so that we are able to make a difference in the market and that it's able to actually help. And if we don't do our market research, the effectiveness of any of our goals and our plans are going to be shortchanged because we're either kind of working in the same line that somebody else is already doing and is already very good at, or we're doing something in a way that is just not helpful. It's actually taking us back to an older way of thinking that is no longer helpful for the way in which we need to function today. So your history is the way in which you reflect on what is effective for humankind. There are things that have been historically always the case for every culture, no matter what the innovations are, and will always be as they go forward. And there are values that we can learn from the stories of the past that we can bring forward to help shape our legacy in the way in which we're operating. Because our companies are microcosms of our larger society. And how they function within that microcosm is a lot like what we're basically advocating for the rest of the world to act like when it comes to our values. And those values and how we live them out will determine the course of our culture. We play a part in helping our culture progress or helping our culture regress. And so learning and reflecting on history should be something that we're doing. And there are some great tips that you can use to quickly surmise when you're thinking about a strategy, what root ideals are we, if we strip this down to its first principles ideas, are these first principles helping us to make us better as human beings? Are they helping us propel us so that we are at our best in terms of how we function? Or are they ways in which that help hold us back and actually cause us to be more tribal and animalistic in the way in which we function rather than continuing to progress in the way in which we manifest ourselves in the future? This is the task that what is at the root of what I try to do with storyscaping. It's helping reflect on stories that manifest the action patterns and ideas and values that you want to reinforce that help you shape your legacy. And this is what we need to be consciously doing, is shaping our legacy, designing our legacy for the future and what that will be for humankind. And if you're talking about training, what that will be for how we think of human learning and development and how we think of growing as individuals and as a community and as a whole culture. And so I would challenge you, think about reflecting on your history. Think about bringing history to bear, bringing on people who understand their history, who understand thinking about root ideals and stripping things down into their basic fundamental first principles and helping to compare how are these going to play out as we propel ourselves into the future. That's what I try to do in Storyscape Design. If you'd like to reach out and chat with me about this, about more, I'd love to connect with you. Also, you could follow me at #CAStoryscape or #Storyscape Design for more information on this very concept, bringing history to bear to shape your legacy. I'd love to connect with you. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.